Hello, Stockholm. Hello. Are you excited to be here? Great. I'm excited to be here. Welcome to this friendly tour behind the scenes of the development community. I am here to dish out some advice because advice is cheap. It isn't though, really. Somebody paid good money for you to be here, and hopefully you will get your money's worth in the next session, probably. My position is an unholy mixture between management and tech. And so is this talk. If you feel that the beginning is not technical enough, rest assured it will get better. If you're enjoying the beginning, it will get worse. Either way, my aim is to give you advice on every aspect of being a noob developer. If you're not a noob developer, then I guess look at the pictures. Starting at the beginning with your CV, moving on to the interview, and ending with the rest of your professional life. I once read some dating advice about how you would appear smarter and more modern and stylish if you didn't have a bunch of books laying around, now that you can just read everything digitally. I guess they meant something like this, and I suppose that would work if you wanted to catch a designer. It seems like hard work to me though, and obviously you can't give advice on bait without knowing what fish you're going for. This is close-up of my bait. Note the asterisks in original French and my little Tintin figurines. Obviously, it's not for everyone, but neither am I probably. And it's the same with the CV. Read and reread the advert, modify the CV and the application, and make the focus on what you know they are looking for, trying to match your experience with their requirements. For example, I don't know if scented CVs would work everywhere, but I'm sure it would work wonders for the right position. In ancient times, and this is the honest-to-God result I got when image Googling that, it was the application or the cover letter you tailored for the position. Today, I would suggest spending more time on the CV and just take enough time on the application to make it clear you're interested in this particular company and not just any old job in the biz. If you're unsure, get someone to look at the spelling and grammar. Some people are known to throw away a perfectly good CV the second they spot a hyphenating error. Me, myself, I work with enough foreigners and people with dyslexia to know that this is not how you measure intelligence. But hey, it might not be me you're replying to, so just make sure. If you're being contacted by a recruiter, do not make the mistake to think that that means that the job is in the bag. You are still expected to impress any number of people before getting an actual offer. So keep focused and keep the hours in right from the start. Also, what's the deal with men posing with fish on dating apps? Anyone here done that? Just don't do that. Congrats! You made it to the interview, I think. First off, it's okay to be nervous. You're interviewing for a position in IT. Nobody's expecting you to be charming. In fact, I'm not even sure they would like it if you were. I have not been on very many dates in my life, and fun fact, I never realized I was on one until much later. But I have a feeling it's a lot like job interviews, and I have been to a ton of those. In dating, as in interviews, don't tell lies. Getting caught in a lie by somebody you care about is not fun. However, feel free to do a little political spin. If you took a year off to nurse your grandma and do drugs in the basement, then maybe focus on the grandma nursing, if you know what I mean. Also, don't be yourself. Or at least don't be your corona quarantine version walking around the house in a smelly t-shirt and no underwear. This also applies to digital interviews. Be on time and make sure that the technology will work and that your visual background and any background noise It's both representative and non-invasive. This is an image of me working from home. Just kidding, that's my husband. This is me. The problem is, just like in dating, people hiring tend to have unrealistic hopes and dreams. They say that LinkedIn is a reverse Tinder, where the hot girls pursue the nerds who tends to ghost them. And there's a truth to that. But maybe LinkedIn is just like Tinder in the sense that it fools people into thinking that the world is filled with brilliant, beautiful people. It is. There's some here even. But are they realistically interested in you or the position you are trying to fill? Which brings me to, I once worked at a place where the actual, believe it or not, working title for a job was superhero. It was a nice enough company, but a superhero. Was a superhero dying to come to work there? Of course, we all realized they didn't mean it literally. They weren't expecting a line of people showing up in capes. But even a superhero in the way that they meant it, which was a designer / UX expert / full stack developer, is stretching the imagination a little bit. I am not those things. But if I was to fill that position, then in the end, they would probably have been more than happy to have hired me. A fairly decent programmer who is not off the charts, colorblind. You know, we all have to settle, don't we? So to all of you, but to the women especially, it never hurts to apply, even though you may not have all the qualifications listed. Because just to make it clear, we are not hiring superheroes, and there will be no capes. One clear difference between interviews and dates, though, is you don't need to play coy about being interested. Try to make it clear that you are interested in this particular position and company and tell them why. Most companies are looking for somebody motivated that will stay for long. Make sure that you get the answers you need to be able to judge the offer if and when it comes. Questions are good, as long as they are relevant. What if you do get a hard no? I recently evolved into not caring about many things that used to annoy and intimidate me, including caring less about this. I guess that is one perk of getting older. But with a bit of practice, maybe you can get there earlier than I did. The secret for me was realizing that picking someone over someone else is hard. If you have many good applicants, you might resort to fairly random and vague criteria. Anything that seems relevant at the time, or just give you a good or bad feeling in the stomach. But in the end of the day, you do have to choose. And it's a very big decision. Making the wrong hire can be very expensive for a company, and even ruin it entirely. What if you don't end up getting an answer at all? These days, we do have a growing problem with ghosting. If this happens to you in dating or in a process, remember it's not your fault. It's the other person that is a coward or just plain lazy. Regardless of how you get the bad news, remember it might not have been about you. It might just be that the other applicant was perfect for the job and had tons more experience. There might even have been an internal applicant that was always meant to have the job. Just don't give yourself a hard time about it, because interviews are hard. It's hard to stay composed and say the right things when you're nervous. I once got so flustered in an interview that I forgot the age of my twins. And I did not get a job offer from them. They are 11. Or was it 12? So you keep trying, all the while being kind and supportive to yourself, and eventually you made it to the last interview and things are looking good. Now that you have an offer in sight, take the time to go through all that has been said so far. Was there any time that you felt uncomfortable, embarrassed, or that you felt the interviewer was lying, being rude, or weird about something? Take a few moments to think about what this might mean about their management style or the company culture. I often ask the question, what do you look for in a manager and what are you looking for in your next company? And I urge you to ask yourself this before you start any processes. Then at this point, circle back and take some time to check that this position is a good match for your abilities and dreams, or at the minimum, a step in the right direction. Whatever you do, try to make sure you work somewhere that values their people. What about the rest of your life? I always hated the how do you see yourself in 5 years' time question, because life change, people change, and this early on in your career is probably very hard to visualize. But working towards being able to answer this question, at least to yourself, is not a bad idea. Do you want to be a generalist or specialist, front-end, back-end or full stack, manager or not manager, architect or tech lead? My advice here is to do as the pretty obsolete pop band of the 80s Roxette and listen to your heart. I told a friend once that if he hated his field of study, wasn't there a good chance he might also hate his profession? And sadly, this turned out to be true. I really believe that following your talent and your interests is always a good idea whenever possible. We might be very lucky with our chosen field, but every position under the sun has moments of deep boredom. Folding up your sleeves and doing a boring job well is a very important life skill to have. But I desperately urge you not to sentence yourself to boredom just to embellish your CV or for money you don't actually need. Because nobody knows for sure what will happen in the future. But I am fairly sure that doing what you love and have an affinity for will always result in you doing a better job. Doing a good job might not guarantee your success in life, but it sure is a good start. So, that's your dream job sorted. Time to give you some ideas on how to keep that job, or as long as developers stay in high demand, how to keep loving it after the honeymoon is over. If we say that the last slides were about dating, let's say that now the real work starts. It's about staying in love and staying together. I have been doing a lot of interviewing the last couple of years, and one thing that I've noticed is that young people now, they seem to be very concerned about getting a mentor. Something like this. Someone that can take you, mold you, and turn you into something awesome. A father figure. Someone that will always be proud of you. Note also in this image that the kid is respectful and attentive. So it's also representative of a dream ideal from the point of the mentor. An official mentor in the sense that the company has picked out someone in charge of your development is pretty common. But the level of commitment, both from the point of the mentor and the mentee, is definitely varying. I remember once a couple of jobs ago, my boss told me I had been assigned a mentor, so I went to talk to the mentor about it. He looked at me in disbelief, laughed, told me he had zero time for that, turned back to his screen, saying good luck. Needless to say, I realized quickly that I was on my own, which was fine. It took me a bit longer having to read through and understand the code myself, but it's absolutely possible that I learned a lot more in that way. We will never know. What we do know is that there was a clear disparity between the management's plan and the reality of my onboarding. So, if this is something that you feel is important, then maybe inquire about the onboarding in the interview and have some follow-up questions ready to make sure that this is in fact a real thing. Be prepared for life to happen though. Your mentor might be arrogant and unhelpful, or be away of maternity leave or quit the day you arrive. In my team, we don't assign mentors because we have adopted an approach that saves us from some of the previous scenarios. I named it after the saying, it takes a village to raise a child, since it's more about being invested in each other as people and professionals. It's about the shift of responsibility, where Even if one person might be the only one with the skills and knowledge to fix something, then we are all still responsible. If one person fails, it's everybody's fault. For not taking away all the other issues she might have, for not being supportive, for not asking her every day if we can do something for her, or for putting her in a position to start with where she is the only one capable. This is an image from our daily meetings. If you don't have or don't want an official mentor, you probably will still need to draw knowledge from people at your work. If someone is doing something you want to learn, ask if you can sit with them and absorb knowledge. Volunteer to take on a task you don't know, stipulated you get assistance of someone else. Chances are that the people you ask will be flattered and that your manager will be happy that you take initiative and that the knowledge is shared. There is also the option that most developers fear and despise, since it involves meeting new people. The networking option. You can go to events and conferences like you're doing right now and participate actively in all the mixers and social events. Maybe have lunch with someone you don't know. You can also join local groups and meetups. This way, you will have people to ask about things that you're wondering about. If you have the cajones or ovaries, you might even want to step up and ask someone you admire if they could officially mentor you and steer your career in the right direction. Joining message boards and contributing to open source projects is another way to meet and draw knowledge from strangers. I think it's underrated in tech to be nice to people. Being nice might or might not get you to heaven according to your beliefs, and it might and might not get you a promotion, who knows? I don't know how much of my career progression can be attributed for me being friendly and how much is me being generally good at what I do. But I do know I once got an extra pay rise for remembering birthdays and buying cake. Not with my own money, just adding reminders in Outlook, making in order and picking up cake. Not that hard. Also, I like cake and I like seeing people happy, so win-win. Saying hello to everybody you see at the office is another thing that you definitely should be doing. I know eye contact and small talk can be difficult for many, but at least nod and smile. It makes them feel seen, and it makes you look like a people person. Also, contributing to a social environment, which largely translates to showing up at after-work events, is huge. I like meeting people, new and old, but even if I absolutely hated it, I would still do it, at least the big ones, like summer and Christmas parties. It's just so important for the work environment and for being able to communicate and cooperate smoothly. Everyone understands if you have a family or if you don't drink, but even so, try to come to something or organize something yourself that fits your schedule, religious beliefs, and life situation. Invite people home for dinner. Arrange a cricket game. Organize a Santa party with the kids of the company. Just try to look alive and involved. Booking a table at a restaurant is easy and can often be done with an app, and suddenly you have arranged dinner. Making sure everyone knows about an event so they feel included is another thing that makes a great impact on the team and potentially also on your career trajectory. When it comes to motivating yourself, I think it's important but arguably difficult to be honest to yourself. If you, for instance, lie to yourself and say that the money is the most important motivator, if in fact you will not get out of bed unless you work with the newest technologies, then you're not going to be happy in the job that offers only money, or vice versa, of course. Lie in the interview if you must, but when it's time to negotiate or renegotiate your terms, prioritize the things that matter the most to you. Be it interesting job assignments, trips to Ibiza, or bonus payouts. When it comes to the day-to-day grind, I have a tip as well. Keep some boring but easy jobs handy for when you're just not feeling it. If you're a person who needs to be super rested to take on something new, Make sure you are super rested before taking on something new. If you, on the other hand, are always down for the nitty-gritty research, but can only be made to do your timesheets if you are well fed, schedule a timesheet fill-out just after lunch. If you have notifications or people wanting your attention all the time, see if you can turn off notifications and reply to emails and chats only when it suits you. For example, adjacent to your breaks or meetings. A good manager should be able to give you other suggestions and support your quest for motivation and efficiency. If your day is broken up by an endless number of tiny meetings, see if there are some you can get out of, or suggest that all meetings are done on Mondays and Wednesdays, or only before lunch, so you get to focus at least some of your time. You should also be working smarter, not harder, apparently. This is one of those sayings that is really annoying because de doi, but also because we might all have different ideas about what it means. And obviously, some of them are objectively wrong. And most of them are probably based on the viewpoint. Like this guy here. Do you think that the eagle is happy about the arrangement? What if that eagle is your coworker? Is that good? Or this guy? Changing the cube to a ball, is that going to work out for everybody? Or these guys with the rakes? I mean, it's arguably better than doing it by hand, maybe. But is it really the most cost-effective we can be? I feel like I've seen all of these before in the industry, and I'm pretty sure at least some of those people felt very efficient. When it comes to being efficient as a developer, I believe it helps to work within the capacity of your working memory. I do this by always trying to make my hands keep up with my head. And the only way I can do that is to not worry too much about the details, but writing keywords, shorthand, abbreviations, and pseudocode. Basically, I try to write the way my head works and not force it into something that is perfect from the get-go, since that only slows me down. Clearly, I need to address the details at some point, but keeping up with my actual flow of thought is much more efficient. Since I work quickly enough, nothing gets lost, and I don't need to spend energy remembering the same things over and over again. I know there are tools that might help you work faster, anything from shortcuts to AI like GitHub Copilot, but for me at least, they're still too slow. And something I would only consider using later when I'm at the actual writing of the code stage. Shortcuts. My tip here is to actually find and print out a chart like this, or whatever suits your platform. Yes, you might feel stupid, but there's always something new to know. You will soon find that some of them is better suited than others to your unique way of working. Focus on learning and using them first, and maybe even make a chart with only the ones that matter to you. If you have some syntax that you use often and struggle to remember, like CSS selectors, you can do the same. Speaking of CSS selectors, if you haven't played CSS Diner yet, you totally should. It's a fun way to learn or refresh your memory on some less known selectors. I have a mishmash of favorite shortcuts that I use the most, and they are these. I will not be going through them now, but you will be thrilled to know that I have brought this with me in the medium of a sticker. So if you want one, come see me later. I also have made my own shortcuts a couple of times when I had to do repetitive work that didn't have a standard one. In this case, set a startup project. You can see, edit, and add shortcuts on the Tools Options keyboard. Here you can also apply a different keyboard mapping scheme if you think that the one you decided on during installation is not doing you any favors. I don't know if the people I've met is representative to developers at large, but I feel I use Immediate and Console more than most people. Depending on your platform, it might have different names, but it's called Immediate in Visual Studio and Console in most browsers. What it does is that it allows you to not only use debug, as in letting the scenario unfold itself, but also allows you a godlike control of it. As you can see here, you can set all settable and get or gettable variables. and thus get into complicated states and scenarios that might take a long time to set up in front end. You can also see what happens to the code when the situation changes or mock returns from other methods and sources. As I told you before, I might write a code that I'm not really sure about, and if it turns out in debug that I had the wrong syntax, I will write the new one in console, see that it works, and then copy that into the code. Or if I'm working on a bug and have a theory about where the fault might lie, I would, for instance, try to change the value on the fly and see if the rest of the code then works as intended. Immediate is usually found hidden somewhere in your Visual Studio, but if not, the shortcut is Ctrl-D-I. Another thing that maybe is new to some of you is that in Visual Studio at least, you can drag and drop the little yellow arrow marking where you are in debug. This is probably the closest you will ever come to time traveling, since it allows you to jump back and forth to another row as long as you stay within context. This is obviously much preferred to restarting the debug from scratch and wait for it to reach the same point. And this might also allow you to reach and test scenarios that would otherwise be impossible. Since the dawning of time, the question about how to get any has been important. How to keep things spicy is also very important. Top 4, as you can see. Keeping it simple, stupid, or kiss is also important. But since I promised you we would be working on your relationships, let's look at spice first. How do you keep it spicy? Romance, experimentation, or if we're talking about work, interesting work assignments, new roles? When it comes to the bedroom, it seems like the #1 tip is doing the dishes. And I know Scandinavian men scores good on the chores, so well done you. Research shows that this is very effective. But what is the office equivalent of doing the dishes from the viewpoint of your employer? I think I'm going to go with keeping your code maintainable, low in bugs, and possible to read. I had to Google how to take a screenshot of this pop-up, by the way, and I'm going to show that to you as a bonus tip. Well, not show, but explain anyway. You can set a delay in most screenshot apps, allowing you time to set up the screen as you like it before taking the actual shot. Did you know this? I didn't. Also, do you think that this is the last days of using the word Google as a verb before we start saying ChatGPT it? Time will tell. There are a number of books you can read on the subject of keeping your nose, that too, your code nice and shiny. But for now, let's look at the cheat sheet. Code should be natural, simple, and beautiful. Not like a hothouse flower, since we are not writing code just for the aesthetics. Obviously, neither should it be like a weed, growing in all directions, destroying every other code it touches, but like a garden of vegetables, in tidy rows with nice labels and everything at the ultimate place both for the plants and the gardener. Certain plants thrive next to other plants, some needs more shade, etc. Our code is in a way a living, growing thing that has needs and ultimately is unique. What does it need access to, and how can we keep it thriving and bug-free? A piece of code can die from lack of care. And when it does, the new programmers might be celebrating that the other fellow's rubbish code is gone, but ultimately it is a waste and not sustainable. So how do you care for your code? The first one I think everybody knows. Don't duplicate code unless you have to. It's better to encapsulate the code in small methods with good names. Don't let it grow into something unmanageable, but keep it pruned and with a clear objective. Limit the amount of arguments. If you need more than one variable for an object, send the object instead to make it easier to handle and read. Be very careful using out arguments, as this makes the process much harder to follow from the outside. Try splitting it into smaller get functions instead, or, if you absolutely have to, design a class to hold the return values. Try to exit any functions as soon as you know that the rest won't make sense or be of value. For example, when arguments or any other prerequisites are missing. Start any method with the shortest way out, leaving the complexity for the end. Make sure that the code calling this can handle whatever you throw at it, be it normal range values, null values, -1, an empty list, or an exception. Unit testing can be very helpful with this. Perhaps the most important and certainly the most overlooked issue is the labels on our plans. I don't believe that the average developer spends enough time on naming their projects, files, classes, functions, or variables. I'm not going to address the old string 1 and string 2, though I know there are people in this room guilty of that, because I know that you know that this is not acceptable behavior and should be punishable by something. I am, however, going to take a second to tell you why, since I know that herding cats is easier than making a developer do what she doesn't want to do. A good name is a cheap way of making the code understandable for someone else, or yourself, if time has passed since the last time you touched it. It's a way to describe the code in layers, so that no matter which section of the code you're reading, you will not need to worry about all that comes before or after, but just focus on where you are right now. It also allows you to not spend time on comments, since the code is self-explanatory, and anyway, maintaining comments is a pain and therefore rarely done. I would say this is time well spent. Whatever rules you decide on, remember to also have a plan of implementation. 3 may keep a secret if 2 of them are dead. The same might be said about coding standards, unless you practice code review or use heavily constricting rules in your editor. Comments is meant to let others know what you did and why. What you did should ideally not be necessarily to talk about, as discussed, but you might, for instance, need to let people know why you have made the decision to use a tree structure instead of a list, or tell them that this algorithm is efficient only as long as you have less than 1 million clients. But in most cases, if you feel the need to explain yourself, you know you did something dodgy. Maybe comments is the equivalent of making excuses when you're always arriving late. I am not saying you shouldn't say you're sorry. I'm saying you shouldn't be late. To-dos are the same. It's fine to add to-dos while you're working on a project, but they should ideally all be gone and implemented by the time that the functionality is delivered. Other types of green code, for example code you thought you might use but ended up not using, should also be gone. A couple of years ago, TDD, or test-driven development, was all the rage. I don't know how many here has heard of it or used it as intended, but I have a feeling the interest has dwindled for several reasons. I really like unit testing as a tool, and TDD can be very useful, but I think it's important to be pragmatic about everything we do and take a moment to assess how different approaches matches our unique way of thinking. I would write the tests before the code if there is a demand for a new feature in existing code or a need to do a refactoring. In both these scenarios, it's imperative that you don't ruin what you already have. So you make sure that all the main functionality and fiddly bits are covered by tests and actually runs green before beginning. Then you start with the tests for the new functionality that initially runs red. Doing this gives you a totally different ease of mind than you could ever hope to achieve with the developer testing only. One thing that is great about unit testing, apart from the inner calm and serenity it will grant you, is that you can often get to a state in the code that is hard to get to by clicking around. Or it might save you from setting up a database or other connections just to write and test a small method. If you have a good structure on the code, you can easily set up a test with any kind of dataset. I recommend focusing the effort on making unit tests on complicated algorithms handling in-memory objects. Other parts of the code that you are depending on, you can probably take for granted is going to work as intended, since they should have unit tests of their own. Usually these are the kinds of issues you will find out about quite easily doing a manual test anyway, unless you have a very large and fragile ecosystem that needs to be monitored over time. If that is the case, then I suggest you do an integration test with real state instead of spending a lot of time handling mocks and stubs. Remember that a unit test should not have any logic, since that might have the unfortunate effect that you don't know if it's the unit test or the code that is failing. Well, you might wonder which of my advice was good and which was bad. Sadly, I can't tell you that because in truth they might all be bad for you. We're all different and we all make mistakes. We just have to keep making them and keep forgiving ourselves when it happens. And as long as you keep trying, you will be okay in the end. Do keep in touch. If you have any questions or just want to make friends, come find me afterwards. Reach out to LinkedIn or, whatever. Thank you.